Hello, I'm Fred Skaggs, retired pastor and marriage and family therapist. Welcome. My subject today is exercising your faith in the dark. My text is Acts 10 and 11, actually, highlighting 10, 1 through 35. It has been said the most important thing you'll ever learn are those you learn after you know everything. Simon Peter was a perfect example when his traditional theology was challenged by a special event in which the true nature of God's grace became intensely clear to him and later to the church at large. Cornelius was a Roman centurion over 100 men. These centurions were the backbone of the Roman army. He was a God-fearer, a term referring to Gentiles who had attached themselves to the Jewish religion. They didn't accept circumcision or the law, but they often attended the synagogue, and they believed in one God and in the pure ethic of the Jewish faith. Cornelius was a caring man who gave gifts liberally to poor people. The word people in this text generally refers to Jews, but not necessarily. He was a man of prayer. He may not have clearly known the God to whom he prayed, but according to the light he had, he lived close to God. Clearly, he was interested in being a part of the household of faith as he saw Christians living out their faith. That's why he sent for Peter, a prominent figure among the believers. But before Cornelius was welcomed into the fellowship, Peter had to learn a lesson that was totally new to him. Strict Jews, not all Jews, but strict Jews believed that God had no use for the Gentiles, and they had little relationship with them. Peter had to unlearn that before he could learn how to reach Cornelius. Peter was staying with a man called Simon, who was a tanner. A tanner worked with dead bodies of animals and therefore was permanently unclean, according to the Hebrew Scriptures, Numbers 19, 11 through 13. No proper Jew would have dreamed of accepting responsibility or hospitality from a tanner normally. But apparently this tanner was a believer at this point. Then, of course, you know Simon Peter. For some strange reason, he was apparently closer to Jesus than any of the other disciples, including the one strangely referred to as the beloved apostle in the Gospel of John. Peter was thoroughly human with all its weaknesses, but when he finally came to understand and accept who Jesus was, and by the way, that took him and the other disciples a long time, he made a shocking turnaround. He turned that voice, those leadership skills, and his devoted heart into being an instrument of God's grace. It appears that he was becoming known for this ministry and his leadership in this small but growing body of believers. Perhaps that's why Cornelius was directed to him. I know of no other reason why he would be. Now, here's the major thrust of this text, verses 9 through 16. About 3 p.m., the 9th hour in Jewish time, Cornelius may well have been having his own private time. In it, he had a vision in which an angel instructed him to send to Joppa for Simon Peter. He didn't understand that fully, but he did what he was told. And he sent 2 of his servants and a devout soldier, a man of faith like himself, to contact Peter. Their journey from Caesarea to Joppa was about 40 miles. At noon the next day, A little before the messengers from Cornelius arrive, Peter goes up to the top of Simon's house to pray as lunch is being prepared. He was hungry, the text says. Houses back then had flat roofs and would be easily accessible for some private time and prayer. Then something phenomenal happened. A trance came upon him. The word trance is stronger than dream or vision. It's a supernatural event. In this trance, Peter sees the heavens open with something coming down. It was like a great sheet being let down by the four corners. As you probably know, the Jews were guided by some strict food laws recorded in Leviticus 11 and other places. The Jew might eat only animals which chewed the cud and whose hooves were split. It had to be both. On that sheet, there were all kinds of four-footed animals, animals that creep on the earth and birds of the air. A voice came to Peter saying, "Rise, Peter, kill and eat." Peter is astonished by this vision and the message and replies, "By no means." That's a very strong word in Greek, and it means certainly not, never. Because I have never eaten anything common or unclean. What is this? But the voice speaks a second time. And notice what it said. Do not call anything impure or unclean that God has made. This happened 3 times. And then the sheet was taken up into heaven. I don't know how long it took him to digest those words. Do not call anything impure or unclean that God has made. But it must have taken a while. He wasn't raised like that. He's supposed to meet this Gentiles' representatives before long. Is he supposed to like them? Is there some kind of connection between this vision and his visit? Today, we need to learn from Peter's experience because people may not always live by what they profess, but they always live by what they actually believe. It's not easy to love people you've been taught to dislike. That was Peter's struggle. That's our struggle. That's been our struggle in America for a long time, and it's getting worse. And politicians are not helping the situation. What can we learn from this text today? At least one thing. We can learn that it's hard to exercise our faith in the dark. Peter didn't understand what was happening. He was confused. He had never heard words like this before. His rabbi never told him this. His mama never told him this. All he could do was just hold on. But make no mistake about it, this was a major challenge to his faith. But shortly, they head out to Cornelius' house, where life-changing things are getting ready to happen. The event we're talking about was a watershed moment in the life of what became the Christian church. Most of the early Christians were Jews. Because of this event, the believers moved out into a world that largely became overwhelmingly Gentile. But prejudices were still there. And even Paul had to deal with that. But it was characteristic of early Christianity that it broke down many barriers, and it can still do that. But sometimes the price is high, very high, because there was then and now still people in the church who don't care for people who are not like them and really don't care to reach out to them. They haven't learned Peter's lesson. Do not call anything impure or unclean that God has made. Koinonia Farm may have been the most daring social experiment in the South during the last century. It's the story of one of the great men of God who believed that what Jesus taught ought to be taken seriously. Starting in 1942, blacks, whites, Hispanics, and others lived together on his South Georgia farm, broke bread at the same table, and got paid the same wages. This commune was started by a white preacher who had a PhD in agriculture and a PhD in the Greek New Testament, named Clarence Jordan. It became the target of white anger, complete with arson, bombs, boycotts, and shootings for no other reason than that Jordan wanted people to know Christ and to know the love of Christian discipleship. It got unbelievably nasty. Out of this violent history grew the worldwide ministry of Habitat for Humanity, recognized today all over the world. Clarence Jordan and his family were voted out of their Southern Baptist church because he led this ministry. The KKK members in his church burned his home, threatened his life and his family's life, all because he had the nerve to let these people eat at the same table and be paid the same wages. Jordan was the author of the famous Bible translation, the Cotton Patch Version of the Gospel. It's still popular and in print today. In 1969, Clarence Jordan died of a heart attack. None of the local funeral directors were willing to help with his funeral, either out of prejudice or fear of violence from other Christians. So he ended up being buried in a plain cedar box in an unmarked grave in an unmarked hillside near his farm, not on it. The actual site is unknown to this day. If the church that said these things and did these things to him if it's ever apologized for its heathen behavior, I'm not aware of it. But that was a long time ago, wasn't it? We don't have that problem today, do we? I guess we don't need to erase Peter's story from the Bible quite yet, do we? Jordan struggled in the dark night of his soul about the direction of his ministry and how other believers fought it. But he held on, and his ministry is still going today. What happened at Cornelius' house? Cornelius says to Peter, "Now we're all here to listen to what the Lord has given you to tell us." They listen, they respond, and mighty things begin to happen. Peter, who struggled with his faith when it didn't seem to make sense, speaks to them and says, "I now realize how true it is that God does not show favoritism, but accepts men from every nation who fear him and do what is right." Have you learned what Peter learned? To hold on to your faith when it doesn't seem to be working? That God cares about you and everybody else he created, no matter what they look like or if they are different from you. Do you live with that conviction? People can see that regardless of what you tell them. Amen.